Yeah, so one of the girls that I pledged sorority with at Howard University got the word out to the community.
Oh, yes.
Indy.
She took care of all of us. I'm about 2 years ahead of you, but
okay.
But I remember coming over to Howard for the basketball games. I was a cheerleader.
Of course. Oh, you were.
Yes, football too. Yeah, but no, it was interesting, and some of the things you described, I truly do understand.
Mm-hmm. Good.
My mother is Midwest nice also.
Okay, that was something I learned about.
Well, not only is she Midwest nice, but she's African American Midwest nice in a little teeny town in Iowa. So yeah, it was fun reading it. Actually, I enjoyed it.
That's great.
Hi everybody, welcome. My name is Bryce. I'm from Indie Reads Books. Hi Dolores, nice to see you.
Hi, I'm looking for you, but I don't see you yet.
I'm one of these talking heads.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's me with the bookstore logo behind me.
That's it.
So we have a lot of people registered for this, so I expect we'll have some people kind of trickle in. But if you don't mind, I would just want to speak really briefly about the bookstore and what we do before I introduce you and we get into your book. So we're Indie Reads. We're a new and used bookstore, and we're part of the Indie Reads Foundation, and we have a goal of making Indianapolis 100% literate. We're currently open for curbside pickup and sidewalk sales, and we can order any book that you might need, including Say I'm Dead. We have been doing this literary society every Friday. So next Friday, we've got another author joining us. Her name is Amy Schmidt, and she's reading a book that she wrote called Cannonball: Fearlessly Facing Midlife and Beyond. So she has a mission to change how we think about midlife, change it from a crisis into an opportunity for growth. So if you want to register for that event or learn about any of the other events that we're doing all the time, please follow us on Facebook or visit us at indiereadsbooks.org. You can see all of that stuff. But with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our special guest. E. Dolores Johnson was born in Buffalo, New York. She earned degrees from Howard University and Harvard Graduate School of Business. After a career in tech, she took an MFA equivalent course to learn creative writing. She's a published essayist focused on interracialism, and she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's joining us today to discuss her memoir, Say I'm Dead, a family memoir of race, secrets, and love. So Dolores, once again, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for Indie Reads inviting me to the Literary Society, and to all the people who have joined us here this afternoon. I'm looking forward to a great conversation with all of you. I wanted to tell you why I wrote this book before we get into it. I wanted to show the picture of what mixed race life is and has been in America. I wanted to show what racism looks like and what love across the color line looks like. I wanted to show the price people have paid to be in mixed race relationships. And I wanted to show the origins of mixed race people in America, which came from plantation rapes, and take it all the way to today when the US Census reports that the growth rate in mixed race births outstrips the growth rate of single race births by 3 to 1. And that was the report in 2010. The prediction is in this 2020 count from the census, the number will be even bigger. And I wanted to show all of that through the true story of my own family. So with that, I'd like to read a portion of the book before we open it up. Bryce is going to help us with the Q&A section. And so here goes a reading. This takes place in your town, Indianapolis. The Negro Cabbie asked Ella twice if she was sure of the address, if she wanted the colored side of town. She assured him she did, And when the cab pulled up at his place, Charles was waiting for her on the sidewalk. As he helped her out of the taxi, the cabbie turned all the way around in his seat to glare at Charles. "Man, why you want to mix me up in something like this?" he asked. "Just take the dollar," Charles said. "You haven't seen anything here, you understand?" She went into his room in the boarding house and sat in a next easy chair as Charles fixed the Coke she asked for, adding a splash of whiskey before pouring a straight one for himself. She raised her glass and made the toast the boys at her acting group had taught her. "Here's to it and to it again. If you don't do it when you get to it, you'll never get to do it again." He liked the life in her eyes and the spirit in her soul. Without it, he realized, she would never have come here to see him. Charles turned the radio to a Moody Blues tune, then a color announcer came on. "Hey, all you cats out there, it's Saturday night. Go get your best gal so we can cut a rug. Keep the dial right here where the party keeps a-going all night long." He pulled her up to dance, though she protested that she wasn't much good. Ella Fitzgerald was on, and much as they tried, neither could follow what the other was doing. Ella knew the Foxtrot with its set patterns, and Charles knew the country mule. They laughed through false turns and stepping on each other's feet, but when a slow one came on, they did better. He folded Ella into his chest, and she followed his simple steps. In no time, they were cooking together at his place a couple of nights a week, and as they grew in love, Charles began to worry. He didn't think she understood the trouble she could get in for being with him. Did this white girl even know she could be attacked in the street if she was with him? Did she have any idea what she could face for breaking the unwritten Jim Crow code? A number of Indianapolis and Marion County elected officials were open members of the Klan. They posed as the good guys, doing good deeds like giving away free things to needy whites. But did Ella understand that the Grand Wizard, a man named Stevenson, used to run the nationwide Klan from Indianapolis? That they hated Negroes so much they terrorized and killed them? She didn't know. 2 Negro men got lynched in Marion, Indiana, a few years before he and Ella took up. After a robbery and a murder, a white woman claimed rape. The suspected men were locked up briefly until a white mob broke into the jail with sledgehammers and strung them up. Charles saw a picture postcard of the lynching taped up next to the price list in the black barbershop. On it, a big crowd of men and women milled around the brown bodies hanging from trees. The crowd's white faces were satisfied. The victims' heads bent over their nooses where their necks must have broken, their limp legs dangling free. These bodies were left on display as whites congratulated each other on delivering vigilante justice. It was proof, a man in the next barber's chair told Charles, of how the Klan was the law in Indianapolis. "Don't take no chances in these parts," the man said. "Nobody has been called to account." As happened at many lynchings, studio photographers shot a ghastly picture, then sold thousands of copies, like circus souvenirs, to white people who wanted a keepsake. That picture I sourced from the Indianapolis Historical Society, and it's in the book. And by the way, the Historical Society has put my book into their gift shop. Charles sat Ella down to explain how it was. Somebody could get the law on him for being with her, trump up the charges and throw him in jail, beat him half to death or string him up like those other 2 men. And nobody would do a damn thing about it. He was getting pretty scared about their relationship, and she should be too. She had to understand that at the very least, the place they worked would fire them both if they were found out. Then white people would all turn their backs on her. And when we were hearing this story, we were sitting, my two brothers and I, talking to my parents. So my brother David asked, "Mama, didn't you know any of that, really? How could you not know?" "My white life was completely sheltered from that kind of thing," Mama said. "Negro business wasn't my business or anyone's I knew. My family didn't follow politics or race, and even if they had, a lynching wasn't anything to talk to a young lady about. When your father explained all this to me, I had only the slightest idea." Charles wanted Ella to think those risks through before they saw each other anymore. She needed to decide if the risks were worth it to her. She had to be sure she could live with never taking him home to her family, to staying alert all the time so they never made that one mistake that could ruin their lives. He took Ella by the shoulders and finally said he loved her so much he was willing to take those risks for her. His forehead sweat and his voice dropped deep with desperation when he said he had to know she loved him the same way. He pulled her into his arms and stroked her thick curls. "Take some time to think hard before you answer me," he said. "I mean it. And if you don't come back, I'll understand." Thank you.
Thank you for reading that. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Everybody was frozen for me for a second. Can you hear me,
I hear you-
Dolores?
I hear you now.
Okay, great. So I want everybody to know that we'll be taking questions. You can send them in the chat, or we'll ask if you want to ask them on video. But I know I had some things I wanted to ask about, having gotten to read about the first third of the book so far. You just told us a little bit about what it was like for your parents when they're dating. But I'm wondering if you could talk about what it was like for you growing up. You mentioned in the book that in 1958, only 4% of Americans were okay with interracial relationships. Can you talk a little bit about the discrimination that you used?
Can you all hear me? Somebody nod if you do. Okay. So when I was 10 years old in 1958, the Pew Research Center did a national survey which showed that 96% of Americans were against race mixing. My parents were married in 1943, which was 15 years before that. So we actually faced a lot of discrimination. There was the scene that follows where my mother and father are talking about their risks, their decision that they would run away from Indianapolis. And my father told her, "Look, we can't stay here with this Klan on the council and these lynchings, and it's against the law, because if you intermarried in 1943 in Indiana, you would be sentenced to prison for 7 years, the man and the woman." And so he told her, "Look, we have to go from here if we want to get married," which she said she did want to get married. "And you can't tell anybody, because if you do, the law will come after us and I may get lynched anyway." And so she created her own disappearance. She made up the story to her family that she was going to visit an old school friend in Massachusetts, and they put her on the train wishing her a good vacation, and she disappeared into thin air. My mother went to New York City and then took a train from there to Buffalo, where my father was waiting for her. She had sent a postcard home from Manhattan where she spent the night from the hotel desk. They keep those postcards. And so when she didn't show up, when she didn't come back home and her father contacted the girl in Massachusetts, she didn't know anything about this vacation. And so the police got involved. And they found nothing in Indianapolis after interviewing all the interested parties. And then they followed her route across 4 states, and the FBI got involved because it was interstate traffic. And they ended up in New York City thinking she was there. And the detectives in New York City searched for her all over. And her dad went to New York to look for his precious daughter. He thought she was there. He'd never been to a big city like New York, and he was distraught and forlorn. And the police called him in and said that all the authorities had conferred, and they were closing the case and labeling her the victim of foul play, which meant that she was either murdered, even though they hadn't found a body, or sold into white slavery. And that is what they lived with, because my mom stayed in hiding and never contacted her family for 36 years. Now, when she married my dad, my mom really had no idea really of the circumstances, as the scene I just read tells you. But when they arrived in Buffalo, it was legal to get married, but it wasn't accepted. And even my dad's own family were very trepidatious about this relationship. So my dad took my mom to a birthday party after they first arrived in Buffalo, where there was actually a split in the family about her. They called her names, and they were pretty mean to her. And there was nearly a fist fight. So I asked this great aunt of mine, Rosalie, way, years later, maybe like 10 years ago, why did you all treat my mother like that? She was such a sweet lady. And they said, this was a runaway white girl, and the law was after her. We knew the law had to be after her, and we didn't want to be anywhere mixed up in that. We were afraid. So we kept our distance. So there was that racism, but there was also everyday racism against Black people. My father was discriminated against in his job, in housing, in healthcare, everything that goes on today that we've heard about during this racial reckoning that's going on today was in spades at that time. But there was also racism against us as a mixed race family. And as I just pointed out, nobody in America liked the idea, but there we were. And so Black and white people were disgusted with us. We would go to the amusement park and people would herd their children over in the corner so they didn't touch us. And they would call us nasty names in public. And there was a boy down the street, and my oldest brother, who really looked completely white, was playing down there in the vacant lot with this boy. He picked up a 2x4 with a rusty nail in it and slammed it into my brother's head, and blood was gushing out when he came screaming into the house. And my mother took him to the hospital to get stitches. And when they talked to the boy later, he said he did it because he didn't like the fact that my brother looked white. So there was all that kind of stuff that went along. So to your question, Bryce, we had all kinds of racism to cope with.
Some of the early chapters, you talk about how you found a community of other mixed race families. Can you talk about some of that?
Sure. So my mom was raised Catholic, and she continued with her Catholic religion, even though she had remarried to my dad, which caused her to be excommunicated. She kept that faith anyway. And she wanted my oldest brother to go to Catholic school as she had. And when she took him to the first day of first grade, she saw another white woman with a little brown child in the same class. And they struck up a conversation where this lady invited her over for coffee. and told her there was a community of mixed race families in Buffalo. So when my mom went, she met a couple of other white women that were married to Black men. Most of the men were jazz men. There was the Black Musicians Club in Buffalo. And these guys had a band that played at the Moonglow nightclub, which was the place for jazz in Western New York. People came from Canada, Pennsylvania, and Ohio to hear them play. And by the way, they had a dance review, this bevy of girls in sequin costumes, and one of them was Betty James, Rick James' mother, the super funk singer. So we grew up with that colorful group of mixed race kids, and we called each other cousins. And one of those women became my mom's best friend. Her story was particularly painful because she led a double life. Her family was in Ohio, and they couldn't abide the idea of Black people whatsoever. They owned a supper club, and they had a band that played, so you could go for dinner and dancing at their place. And they hired this soft jazz band. The trumpeter in the band invited this woman, whose name is Angela in the book, on a date, and she snuck out with him. Ended up, they got married. And Angela was the hostess in the restaurant, so when she didn't show up for work and the trumpeter didn't show up for the band, her father put two and two together. Because this small town in Ohio didn't let Blacks go to hotels, they had to cross the border every night and go over to Pennsylvania, where there was a rooming house run by a mixed race woman, and that's where they all stayed. And her father figured out this must be where they were. And he went over there, and when he banged on the door, they had the chain on it, but they held their hand up showing they were married. And her father had sent some men to scare him, and they told him that they'd kill him if he ever spoke to her again, and they drove her out of there and had the marriage annulled. But it turned out that she was pregnant, and she ran away again and married him the second time. She went to Buffalo. So there was my mom, who was hiding from her family. They thought she was dead. And this woman who had run away from her family, but then she led a double life by telling the people in Ohio that she had a big time job in Buffalo. She couldn't leave. It kept her so busy. But she still went back to Ohio and left her Black children and her Black husband in Buffalo. And the family knew nothing of this marriage. And she did that till the day she died, for over 60 years. And this is the price that people paid. And many of the people that were in that clique club were also suffering from shredded family relationships. Both the Black people and the white people were totally through with these people who married across the race line.
That's so sad that that's the choice they were faced with, either to keep it a secret or to risk or just disappear like your mom did. Sorry.
I was just going to say, that's the price that people paid in those days if they loved across the color line.
What do you think? What do you think was your mother's motivation when she told you that if you found her family, to tell them that she was dead? Was it fear? Was it more than that? Why do you think that was?
So I asked for a family meeting when I realized at 31 that my mother was her white family all by herself, and that couldn't be true, that there was no white branch on my family tree. So when we sat down to talk about that, my mother was shocked and very upset. She sort of like squeaked and jumped up in her chair when I said our white family was missing and I wanted to know who they were. And you have to be in her shoes. She had buried that secret after she and my dad ran away. She had never been in touch with her family again, and they had never spoken of her family to us. We didn't know anything about them. That's why it was such a mystery. And here I was digging up her secret. She and my dad went upstairs to talk because she was upset, and she and he were passing these looks back and forth. They didn't know what to say. And when they came back down about an hour later, my mother told us, because my two brothers and I were all adults in our 30s. And she said, well, now you're adults, we're going to tell you. We didn't tell you any of this because we didn't want you to know the pain and the history behind our marriage, but we ran away together. And when we got the story out of them, I said, well, I need to know who these people are. I want to know about them. I want to look at them and see what they look like and find out what they're made of. And I'd like to go find them. And my mom said, you know, after what I did, running away and leaving them to think I was dead all these years, I could never face them again. I feel so guilty. They must have suffered, you know, from my disappearance, and they're not going to take me back. I couldn't face them. And I said, but I want to do this for me because now I need to understand who my whole family is. And she said, okay, if you want to do this for you, I understand what you're saying, but you leave me completely out of it because I cannot face them. And I said, well, if I find them, what am I supposed to say about you? And she told me, say I'm dead. And that's where the title of the book comes from.
I just want to remind people, I know my internet connection is bad, so in case you missed it, feel free to ask questions anytime to jump in. I'm wondering what kind of reaction you've gotten to the book or to some of the essays that you've written. Have you had people reach out and share similar experiences?
Yes, you know, it's quite interesting because I want to tell you about my website. It's www.edoloresjohnson.com. And on there is a contact form. If you want to get in touch with me to ask me a question or have me speak with your book club or whatever, you can do that on my website. But it's so interesting what comes in the mail on that website. I have had a lot of feedback from different people who try to understand more about mixed race in America, people who are mixed race and are struggling with their own identities, parents whose kids are about to marry over the color line, want to talk about that, young families, young mixed race families who want to talk about how the Black Lives Matter movement and their mixed race babies are going to gel. What is that going to mean? What is it going to look like? And having the talk with these brown kids about the police and all of that. So it's gotten that kind of personal response on my website. And in settings like this, where I've talked with people, I've learned a lot from the questions that people ask and the comments that they make. Reception has been good, and I've gotten some really nice press coverage and some radio interviews. Some conventions have invited me to speak, so the word is getting around and the conversation is rich.
How much do you think things have improved? How far do we still have to go?
Well, we've come a ways. When you look at the origin of mixed race in this country, which was plantation rapes that went on for 400 years, there wasn't any voluntary race mixing from the Black woman's point of view. And it was, quote, a right that white men felt they could just do as they wished. And we don't see that kind of thing very much right now. We do see this voluntary intermarriage and this blossoming growth rate. And I say that is progress. But if you look at the whole picture of racial relations in the United States, you know, I feel like we are still inching along the continuum of getting to equal justice. from slavery to Reconstruction, where promises were made to the newly freed slaves and then revoked. And then they were abused with Jim Crow racism for the next 150 years. And we had the civil rights movement in the 50s, where we gained access to housing, to education, and so forth, but still fought the culture of racism, which I talk about in my book, and I'll come back to that. When I went to Louisiana, I found out that changing the law doesn't change how people act. And now we are at this new reckoning point. And so to me, if you look at the Nirvana picture of racial equality in this country, we still have a very long way to go, but we are inching. It's taken us 500 years to get here. So when will it be perfect? I wish I knew. But when I talk about how the law doesn't change how people behave, my husband and I got these nice jobs in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We had been married fairly recently, and we were in New York. We decided to take the jobs against my father's warning. My father grew up on a farm in Georgia, and he and his mother called their trip north to move to Buffalo escaping Georgia in the Great Migration, when 6 million African Americans left the South and spread out all the way through America from coast to coast. So we got down there, and we found racism in our face big time, completely. And I had said to my father, we can go down there now because they passed the civil rights laws, thinking that meant everybody was going to be equal. I was 26 and pretty stupid. So we had a cross burned on our lawn. I had defiant white employees who refused to cooperate with my leadership. I had managerial colleagues, because I was over a staff of people, all white people, and they really didn't like that. And I had managerial colleagues who made racist remarks about Black people in front of me, thinking I was white, which is another thing about being mixed race. People say stuff to me all the time because they think I'm white, which has taught me that you can't trust that smile and that gesture. There's something else behind that you have to be careful about, because it's a casual racism. The number of people who in a grocery store line or at a sporting event or in the theater will say something derogatory about Black people proves everybody can do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't say it to me. I'm a stranger. And that nobody's going to do anything about it. The stranger is not going to tell them to be quiet, or that's not nice, or correct them in some kind of way. So I know that it goes on all the time. But anyway, the South taught us that the law does not mean that people are going to behave differently. And that's why I was always an advocate of affirmative action, because it made people do what the law said, and it was measured, and it was reported to the government, and it was investigated. So for people who don't like affirmative action, who think it's some kind of giveaway, I would say, I graduated from Harvard, and I was an affirmative action hire. Now, if somebody wants to tell me that I wasn't qualified, I'll talk to them all day long about how that's not right.
Yeah, and in the chapter Code Switch, you talk about having to navigate corporate America, which especially then, but still today, it's overwhelmingly white. You were often the only Black person there. Can you talk a little bit about some of the techniques you developed in order to survive that?
When I took my first executive position at the biggest corporation in America, I was the highest ranking Black female there. They had 1 million employees. When I got there, I found out I had to conform to the culture of that place if I wanted anybody to listen to me. I could do the work just fine, and I had a million great ideas, but I was surrounded by white men who were trying to discount me at every turn. I tell them, let's do X. They're talking about a problem. I say, could fix that by doing X. They ignore me. They talk for another hour. And somebody else says, some other white man says, let's do X. And they say, great idea, let's do that. I knew that if I went in there and let Ebonics slip into my language, I grew up, I'll say bilingual, speaking Ebonics in the street and the King's English because my mother insisted on that in the house and at school. If I let Ebonics slip, or if I didn't conform to the behaviors and the niceties, like I worked at Harvard University and they've got this veneer of refinement. You got to appear that way no matter how you feel underneath if you want to succeed and be a part of the team. And so my husband and I used to practice. After dinner at night, we would filter our language. He would make a presentation, I'd critique him, then I'd make a presentation, he'd critique me. Don't stand like that. Don't use that word. Don't laugh that loud. All of this, editing, pretending, code switching, language, was a burden. It was a second job to fit into white corporate society. It was something that was exhausting. And when I got home, I could take off that mask and be myself. So I felt like white America had let me in because I had proven myself, and I came with, the good housekeeping seal of approval with my educational background. But then I had to study something else, how to act like white people, because they weren't accepting Black mannerisms, speech, laughter, gestures, whatever. And this is a phenomena that has been written about by a very famous revolutionary named Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon was born in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean in a French protectorate. He was brilliant. He went to Paris and became a psychiatrist. And when the North African nations, or I should say colonies, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, were rising up against the French, the overlords, the colonists, he went down to Algeria. Everybody could see that a war was going to happen. And he wrote this seminal book called Blackface, White Mask, which said how the Africans in Algeria had to pretend. They had to put aside their Arabic and speak French. They had to dress like the French people, take their robes off and put on a Western suit, all this stuff. And Frantz Fanon was one of the mentors of Martin Luther King's. He was a seminal thinker in this divided identity and this coming into your own and being who you are without the yoke of an overlord, whether it's a white corporate boss or the French government telling Black people they can't be who they are. That's a way away from my book, but I'm sorry.
No. So I had a question come in for you from a fellow memoirist who's asking, how long did the book take to research and write, and what were some of your sources of support and feedback as a writer?
I spent several years, 6 years, writing this book. And that was because I didn't know how to write this kind of a book, and also because I had a lot of research to do, because this book is called a reported memoir because it's based on facts. But to back up, having been in business especially in technology where everything changes so fast. Everything is due yesterday and it's urgent, urgent, urgent. So you learn to write the facts and write them fast when you're trying to communicate. And so when I decided to write this book, I just wrote it. And I gave it to a writing teacher to comment on. And when she gave it back, she said, you know, you have here is a business report. You don't know anything about creative writing. This is not it. And so after she discussed what she meant, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I went back to school, and I was retired at that point. So then I went back for a year of an MFA equivalent course, where I learned how to write scenes and dialogue and description. But I was also influenced by some journalists I knew. And so I came back to Indiana and did a lot of research. I went out to Madam C.J. Walker's Ballroom. Lilia Bundles, who is the granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, took me through that property out Indiana Avenue and showed me the ballroom where my father went looking for a nice colored girl, and when he didn't find one, he fixed his eyes on my mother. It was also important for me to interview the people who appear in the book, because when you write memoir, you want to tell the truth, and you want to tell people they're going to be in the book. You want to tell them what's going to be said. Some memoirists don't let other people see what they're writing about them. Some do. But I also studied anti-miscegenation laws. I studied the Klan culture in Indianapolis in the 30s and 40s. I flew around the United States and found all the families that were in that clique club in Buffalo to talk to them. I actually developed an interview guide and asked all of them the same exact questions so I could parallel their stories in the book. So it was quite a labor of love.
Had another question come in, which was, did you, in your professional life, identify as Black or something else on applications, etc.?
Black.
Black.
I grew up as a Black kid. As I told you, when I was born, my birth certificate was stamped Negro with no reference or regard to my mother's biology. We lived in a ghetto, and early in my life, I felt shut into a grid that was a racist boundary around my life. When my father rented the place that we lived in, which was really just, very, very humble, the landlord fixed nothing. The ceiling fell in on us on Christmas Day. It was that kind of a place. When he tried to get another place, he was told, no niggers here. When we went to school, the classes were mixed. In the early grades, the white children were favored. I was put on a dunce stool the first day of school because I couldn't tell them my whole name, my first middle. I used E. Dolores Johnson. My first name is Ella. And there's a story to that. On my mother's line, there's like 5 or 6 Ellas. But my mother didn't want to call me that, so they called me Dolores. But the teacher asked me what my name was, and I told her Dolores, but she had an Ella on her sheet, so she set me on the dunce stool for a week, telling me I didn't even know I was too stupid to know my own name, till my mother went down there and straightened her out. But I found in high school that I was put into the honors track. I was always a straight A kid. And most of my friends, we were bused across town to high school. And most of my friends from the ghetto were tracked in vocational, secretarial, woodworking, that kind of stuff. And only the Black dentist daughter and myself were in the honors track in a school that had 600 in the class. And I'm listening to my white classmates, who I'm outscoring in many cases, talking about going to college. And I don't really know anything about going to college because I don't know anybody who has ever gone. But I figure if they're going, why don't I go? So I go see the guidance counselor, and she said, how can I help you? And I say, well, I want to know about going to college. I didn't even have sense enough to put together a reasonable set of questions. And she told me, oh no, Dolores, colored girls don't go to college. If you do anything after high school, you should take up sewing, go down to the vocational school. She offered me no brochures, no advice. She dismissed me. And I'm standing outside so confused, and then I got angry. I said to myself, what does she mean colored girls don't go to college? You know, is that why she didn't offer me anything? And then I realized I had a 12-year transcript of straight A's with 1 D in sewing. That woman had never even looked at my transcript or cared nothing for my future. That's racism. And it happens still today to kids in school.
Dolores, this is Celia. Do you mind? Okay, this is a question that I've read the book, and I wondered when you got to the point where Dorothy comes to visit that you guys were not comfortable letting them stay, you know, with you, that, you know, your mom felt it was better that they stay at the Holiday Inn. And I guess I didn't understand that. And I guess I wanted to know that they actually stayed with you, because that would be, well, I don't want to say the true test, but that would really show them, you know, your life, your mom's life, and how, you know, you grew up and where you grew up. That's one thing. And the other piece is this, and this is just, I don't know, kind of personal, I guess, Dolores. Do you think that you would have gotten a different reaction when you first showed up at Dorothy's if you were not who you are, meaning Howard University graduate, Harvard MBA, you know, if you had come a different type of woman? Because when I look at it, going and, I don't want to say inserting yourself into their life, because you belonged in their life, those were your relatives, but you came with so much value added, Dee, and that's because, you know, I know you. You know, you brought so much. I mean, you were a gem. You know, you brought them a gem, a diamond.
Well, let me go back to your first question.
Okay.
So when I went back to Indianapolis and I found my aunt, my mom and I went out there and they visited. They had a week's reunion, and then about 1.5 years later, it was decided that she was going to come to visit my mother in Buffalo. Now, we still lived in the ghetto. We lived in a better place than we started out, but there were no white people in the neighborhood except my mother. And this friend of my mother's, who I mentioned had led a double life, had talked in secret with her closest sister back in Ohio and told her what the true story was and asked her, please come and meet my family. But let's you and I at least bridge this gap. And the sister snuck away from home on some pretense and drove to Buffalo. And when she drove up in front of Angela's house, here comes Angela and her daughter. They're all dressed and food is ready and they're so excited. And her sister doesn't get out of the car. She rolls the window down and says, come over here, come over here. So Angela says when she got to the passenger window, her sister had the hair and makeup and clothes of a princess and the eyes of a crazy woman. And she said, there are so many Negroes around here. Oh my God, I'm so scared. I'm not coming in your house. This place is just too scary for me. She turns it around and drives away. So this was the debate in our house about where was my mother's sister going to stay when she came to Buffalo. So my brother David, I had 2 brothers, and one, David, he was a race man, you know. He wore dashikis all the time and ran the Juneteenth festival and all that. And David said, they have to stay right here, same as what you're saying, Celia. They have to come here and prove that they can deal with the ghetto and all the Black people. And my mother said, but what if she gets scared and runs away like Angela's sister did? So it was, you know, most of the decisions that were made in this getting back together business were my mother's to make. I had gone and met them and seen them, okay? But my mother was the one whose heart was broken, who was on thin ice, who was scared. And so she's the one who said, no, I want to put them in a Holiday Inn because I don't want any mess, but they're going to come over here and they're going to be at the house all the time. You know, we're going to have meals here and the friends and family are going to come by and meet them and all that here. I don't want to have them sleep here. So that was how that happened. Now, your second question, tell me again.
The point I was making is that you brought so much, you
okay.
enriched, you so enriched
I
their
remember.
lives. I mean, you know,
How would they have received a different kind of person?
yes.
Oh.
I'm saying, you know, yeah.
I can't tell you how they would have received another person, but what I can say is that what I found was they were all about family love. They made it clear that race was not their question. Family unity was. Because when I first met my aunt and her husband in the airport, and I explained to them that my parents had run away because it was illegal to get married, my uncle shook his head and he said, that's the damnedest fool law I ever heard of. So right off, without having seen any indication of my father or my husband who was dark, they seemed to be open to whoever it was. But I agree with you that they were not highly educated people. They were blue collar people. And yes, I think that my education stood out to them. You were right about that. Where one of my cousins, when my aunt's husband died, my Uncle Tony died, I went out to the funeral. And one of my cousins was sitting there with her husband and another couple who were friends of theirs at the family gathering at the wake. And she called me over and she said to me, tell them where you went to school. And I said, Harvard, and their eyebrows shot up and nobody said a word. There was some of what you're talking about.
Dolores, I got a request if you could comment on the fact that code switching is still something that Black Americans must do daily in corporate America still.
Oh, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. You know, having been a manager of people, I can tell you that I've seen the embedded systemic racism that people don't know they have enter into their assessment of fellow employees who are Black and brown. Why don't they speak good English? You know, this is a question I have heard many times. So you have immigrants who have an accent, you have Black people who, like me, go back and forth between Ebonics and straight English. And these people are complaining that they have to interface with somebody who doesn't speak good English. Not can they do their job, not are they decent, good people, not that last year they saved our bacon through Project X. No, none of that. Then I had an HR manager who was sitting in on a group interview for a new hire, and a Black woman came in and she was ultimately fit for the job. She was very well experienced and prepared, and she wanted that job. And after she left, the HR manager of the company said, well, we can't hire her. And I said, well, why not? He said, did you see her hair? She had it all in those braids. I said, and? He said to me, well, you know what that means. That means she's militant. She's going to be a troublemaker. We can't have that here. I said, you do not have any idea what you are talking about. Black people put those braids in their hair in order to tame what white people are afraid of. That's their natural hair out. They spend a fortune to come in looking neat and styled, and you're going to deny her a job for that? This kind of stuff goes on all the time. So Black people are braced for this kind of racism. And so the more, it's still the truth, the more you can appear like a white person, the more you would be accepted. Now, maybe after you get the job and you start kicking some butt, you can put your hair out if you want to, but white people are so unfamiliar with Black ways, and they fear what they don't know. They misunderstand, they misinterpret, they have their own embedded ideas that their mother told them, whatever it might be. And so how do you overcome that? How do you, people bring that to work? You have to try to fit in, you know, like, it's not that white people try to fit in with minorities to know about East Indian culture or Caribbean culture or Chinese culture. No, everybody else has to try to conform to what white people do. That's racism.
Got a two-part question from Gail. What do you think the psychological and emotional toll has been of your mixed race status? And also, is it common for mixed race families to live in the Black community?
Well, in today's world, it's different from how I came up. As I mentioned, those statistics from the Census Department, I also will say in 2015, they issued a report that 1 in 10 marriages in the United States is mixed race. That's not just Black and white, that's all races marrying all races. And that is projected to accelerate as well. And so people live in the Black neighborhoods or in the, you know, whatever neighborhoods, and also among white people. I think that the issue today is, who do you want to call yourself? Because it's my belief, having come through all of this, that I get to name myself. You don't get to tell me who I am. My mother felt that way too. And that would be illustrated by the fact that when we lived in the Black neighborhood as a family for years and years, there was a neighbor, a very sweet neighbor, and she loved my mother, a Black woman who told my mother she was an honorary Black woman. And that was her compliment, that you are one of us, you know, we're all in community together. We don't see any difference for you. So when we got in the house, I asked my mother, what do you think about that? She said, well, you know, I know that she's giving me love, but I'm a white woman. I was a white woman. I am a white woman. I'm always going to be a white woman. My mother wanted you to see her for who she was. She didn't want somebody to tell her who she was, nor do I. And I think that's the struggle that mixed race people have, like, who am I? Do I have to choose? If I choose, am I denying half of my heritage and half of my family? And because the racism in America continues at such a degree, many mixed race people identify as the minority half. And they live in the minority neighborhood because they feel there they can be accepted and comfortable, as opposed to having people pick at them, come like right in their face, as people have done to me so often, say, what are you? As if I'm some kind of public statue that they can come interrogate, that they don't even know me. And that's because Americans only understand race in a binary way. You have to be Black or you have to be white. But according to the census projections, by mid-century 2050, 20% of Americans are going to be mixed race. That's bigger than Hispanic population is today. So there's a mindset that has to be adjusted as time goes on. But for people who want to identify as Black or Chinese or Indian or whatever they choose, or people who want to identify as biracial. I feel it's their decision.
You had told me at one point that your cousin might be joining us. Is your cousin here to talk about that side of the family?
I can't see all the names, but Tony, are you on the line? I'm not sure she is.
Okay, I don't see Tony's name. Okay.
My white family that lives there in Indianapolis knew that this occasion was going to be happening this afternoon. They were going to try to join in and comment as well. I'm sorry if they're not on the line. Too bad.
That's okay. This will be a recording, so anybody that
oh, there he goes again. The old bookstore Wi-Fi is not ideal.
He froze again.
I know. It's the Wi-Fi in the bookstores in the basements. That's sometimes not great. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a question. This might sound like a naive question, but when I was hearing about your parents' story about how their relationship began, it made me kind of think about like all of the movies that they put in front of us, where it's like Romeo and Juliet, Notebook, where one person or like people's families get in the way of their romance, and they just can't see each other. And I wanted to know if you ever considered that when you thought about the fact that your parents, literally all of society, threatened to murder them if they got together, and how that compared to like, what people told you romance looked like in the movies.
You're right. I mean, in romance movies, there's often that theme of, we don't want you crossing the line over to, we don't want you to marry a Gentile. That's what the Jews tell their kids. Or we don't want you to marry somebody from an immigrant from another country, or we don't want you to marry across the race line, whatever it might be. We do see that. But, the thing was that my family in Indiana didn't know that my mother and father even knew each other. So, they met at work, and she didn't talk about it at home. And he didn't talk about it because they were scared of being discovered. So when my grandfather put my mother on the train, leaving to go on this fake vacation, he loved her. Her sister loved her. She had a very loving family. They did not know what she was up to at all. And so when I went back to Indianapolis to try to find them, I didn't know what I would find. And my brother, who, was the race man, with the dashikis and all that, he told me, he said, "You're crazy. What are you doing this for? These people don't even know that we exist. When you show up there, the last thing they want to know is they got a black person on the porch claiming to be a relative. They're going to shut the door in your face." But that's not what happened. My family was, of course, shocked. And when I first met them, I explained that my mother had married a black man, and they ran away because they didn't think anybody would accept it and there would be trouble for the family. And my aunt sat there in that coffee shop, and she stirred that cup of coffee for the longest while. I didn't know what she was going to say. And she finally said, "Well, they were right. They were probably right." She didn't say, "Oh my God, that's an outrage. It's a scandal. I don't want anything to do with you." She didn't. And of course,
Dolores,
you asked this question about romance movies, and we all know that those are not how life is.
Very true. Yeah.
Dolores, I wanted to try again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned your website. Are there other ways we can keep up with your writing, follow you online?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Dolores Johnson. I'm on Twitter, E_Dolores_J. But please do visit my website, www.dolores edoloresjohnson.com. You'll see some of the other articles that I've written about the census, about interracialism in America. You'll see other interviews that I've done. I have some of those videos and radio programs up. And like I said, please, if you have a book club or gathering of folks who want to have a conversation, I'd love to talk to them. Please do contact me and let me know. I'd be glad to do so.
Hi, my name is Antonia Harlan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm the cousin of Dr. Janet Bennett, and she invited me to this program. I wanted to say my heart is so full right now because I'm so conflicted. My heart is full because of the beautiful love story that your parents shared, as well as being full because of the way they have been treated and you have been treated. But I think this conversation is one that's needed, especially now where we are. And these conversations aren't happening about interracial, about having mixed race. Even you are African American, but you have a mixed race background. And people don't understand that. But I think as a conversation that needs to be had, I'm in the process now of trying to make this something that's on the forefront, this conversation. And so what I'd like to do is reach out to you through your website and give you a little bit of information on what I'm working on. But your story is a beautiful story. More people need to hear it. And when we look at race, we try to segregate people away from each other. And I don't think that's how it's meant to be. And I think if more people, I've done ancestry DNA, and if more people did that, they would see that Americans are so diverse, and they have so many ethnicities that they're part of. But we want to hate, and we want to point fingers at each other, and we need to get beyond that. So if I could, I would reach out to you on your website and give you some information on how you can get your story even out further in the community.
Well, I love that. I appreciate that so much, and please do. And I'll be right back to you when I get your information. I surely will. And I also think that it's time for America to think about this. And some people have asked me if I timed the release of this book with America's racial reckoning. And if there's any authors here, you know that the publication date of a book is set a year in advance, so it was completely coincidental. But I am so happy that my book came out at this time. I'm appalled at what the country is facing in this racial reckoning, but it gives me an opportunity to bring this story to the fore. And when we look at the browning of America, statistics show that by 2045, this will be a majority minority country. White people will be in the minority in 25 years. Part of that is the mixed race story. And the thing about the mixed race story is that there's some hope in it. Because when you choose somebody across the line to build your life with, to have your children with, to make the most important decisions about how you're going to live your life, that love supersedes any kind of racism. Like, how could you have any ill feelings about that person, about their family, about their race in general, your own precious parents or children or spouse? And so I think it's worth talking about. And because we've had Barack Obama, who's mixed race, Meghan Markle got into the British royal family, didn't stay long, but she made it. And we have all of these celebrities. We have Derek Jeter, a baseball great. We have all of these singers and athletes who are mixed race. Like, you've got the kid down the street from you, or in your child's class, or the family sitting in the pew a few benches away from you at church that's mixed race. Your cousin brought somebody to Thanksgiving last year that was somewhere over the line. It's happening around us. and people are getting used to it and accepting it where it used not to be. And when somebody asked me about Black people living in the Black neighborhoods, the thing is that because of the plantation rapes that went on for centuries, those people were taken in by Black people because we had the one drop rule in America, which says if you have one drop of Black blood, then you're Black. But white people never claimed mixed race people because you can't be white if you have Black blood. And so that is why many mixed race people stay with the Black community exclusively, because they know that they're at home and they're not going to be necessarily as well received elsewhere.
Hello, can you hear me?
I hear you.
I had a question. In your book, when your husband presented with lupus, when you all were in the South and he was placed in the hospital, and then you said that the physician brought you papers to have him signed over to the psychiatric ward.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure if you were thinking that was because he was Black or because they just couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. Do you feel that if he had been Caucasian, they would have treated him that same way?
I do not. So, you know, when we were told by his doctor to go to the emergency room to have him admitted, they put him on a gurney in the hall. The doctor signed the papers and left. And we stayed out in that hall for hours. And we were totally ignored. And when I went up to the desk to find out what was happening, the clerk there didn't even give me the courtesy of looking at me. I said to her, why hasn't my husband gotten into his room? She said, because there's no bed for a Black man. That meant they had empty beds upstairs, but he couldn't have one because the white people would be inconvenienced by having him in the room with them. This was the same town where we had the cross burned on our lawn. The same place where one of my belligerent subordinates drove me down a dirt road and I thought he was going to kill me. Yes, it was racism. That doctor I told him that my husband had lupus. Okay. I don't think he looked it up. I don't think he consulted anybody. I don't think he cared. I think, as you know, there was a Black builder that we had been talking to about building a house, and he was the only person we knew in town because we'd only been in Baton Rouge a few weeks. And when I told him that the doctor had presented me with those papers to commit my husband to the state mental hospital, he said to me, oh no, you don't sign that because Black people go in there and they never get out. And there's all kinds of stories about the abuse going on in that place. I don't care what the doctor said. That would be, you would not see your husband on a street corner or a sidewalk again in your life.
Oh, okay.
And when we got to New York City, we went to the Lupus Foundation of America. And the doctor who headed that treated my husband. He was an excellent doctor. He did so many things for my husband. And when we told him our history of this terrible episode, he said, well, why didn't they send you to the Ochsner Clinic in New Orleans, which was 40 minutes down the road? The Ochsner Clinic had a lupus specialty. Now, if that white doctor who wanted me to commit my husband had his interests at heart, it doesn't seem to me that difficult for him to have found out about that and sent us there. Instead, he just wanted to throw my husband away. And I think that was racism through and through.
Thank you.
That's the same health disparity that we're seeing during COVID, by the way. And you've all read about that, how the Black and brown people have the highest incidence of this disease and the least treatment, how they've turned people away from the hospitals and then they've died. What is that?
Dolores?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. As you're speaking, I'm reminded of my grandmother, who, although I'm typical Black person. My grandmother was biracial. And she just completely, her identity and everything, we always in the family knew that her father was a Caucasian, was white, but she was raised in the Black community and her life was centered there. Her mother was Black and her father was white, and she never spoke of it at all.
Mhm.
But she spoke of it to me. I'm a friend of Janet Bennett's also. I'm a psychologist. And it had been a toll and an emotional toll that she had carried all of her life
Mhm.
because she did identify with her white family. She knew the family. She lived with them. When she was a child, she lived. This was in the Deep South. And but they were kind and loving to her, taught her to read, saw to it that she had an education. When she reached a certain age, however, she had to, she married a Black man, and then her life changed. But to me, it was very interesting because when you speak about identity, she still identified. And as she spoke with me, she opened up and told me all about her life as a child. And as you mentioned, the family loved her. Her white family loved her. They respected her, they were kind to her, and they were good to her. But the thing that strikes me is, and I think about this a lot, it seems so as though the white people, they're so cowardly in that they can express the love, but never stand up and say that people are being mistreated.
That's, to me, that's a systemic racism,
It is.
because the societal pressures not to integrate, cross the line, love across the line, all of that are huge. I'm surprised that they kept this Black child, this interracial child, in their home.
Mhm.
And then you say that she never spoke to them, so there must have been a break.
There was a break. There
Yeah.
was definitely a break, and but my mother knew all about this also. But because, as you mentioned, the comfort and the caring as she became an adult was in the Black community.
Mhm.
And that's where they lived their lives. And so I can see that over time, and remember, this was, very early in the century, 20th century. I can see that I can see why some of those things happened, but I do know that that is so unfair to the individual not to be able to even to express and to know that part of your life. So I just see it as tragic. There's a tragedy in these.
Much of what's been written about mixed race is built on the picture of the tragic mulatto.
Mm-hmm. The older pictures are, but I think that there's still identity issues, even so.
Oh, yes. Well, the tragic mulatto is about the fact that someone may be able to pass for white, but then always gets in trouble when they try to. And they reject their Black roots because they want to have all the advantages that white people have. They walk away from their families, their Black families, only to be rebuked in such a way that they have to end up going back. But I didn't want to write that book. I didn't want any tragic mulattoes in my book. I wanted to talk about the possibilities, how things have changed. I don't say this is a cure-all. It's not going to solve racism in America, but I think there is some hope in it.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read it yet, and I look forward to reading it.
Thank you, Gail.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we should wrap up. Bryce had to hop off. He has a child, so that often limits his availabilities. But thank you so much to everybody for being here. Thank you so much, Dolores. It was a fantastic conversation. Like I said, I will be emailing out the video to everybody that registered on Eventbrite. So if I'm assuming you registered there because you got here. So you'll be getting the video. If you want to share it with anybody, that's great. And whoever didn't get to come tonight will also get to see it. So,
well, thank you for
so
having
much.
me. This was really a wonderful conversation. I was so happy to see so many of you, especially Celia there, who I went to Howard with. Thank you all for coming out, and I hope to hear from you on my website.
Yes,
We didn't get to talk about Vox and that problem that's going on in Indianapolis. I hope somebody would bring that up.
You want to say a few words about it?
Vox Booker, does anybody have anything to tell me about that?
Mm-mm.
I live in California.
That's in Bloomington. That's really.
Yeah, well, it's not in Indianapolis, right?
No, it was.
But you know, it's in Marion, which is where the lynching took place. That scared my father. So I wonder how much has changed over there.
Mm.
Could someone say what it is? So since I live out of state.
There was a fellow named Vox Booker, black man who was going to some sort of a group thing on a beach. He cut through some private property, and there's questions about whether he had permission or he didn't. And some white people accosted him and took him to his knees, had him up against a tree, and were calling for a noose.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I do. I saw that on the news, but I had no idea, Dee, that it was in Indianapolis. But I saw the whole thing on, I think, MSNBC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's the same place where this lynching of these two men took place. And I'm saying to myself, what's going on out there?
Yeah, it's still happening. It's not it's maybe a little quieter, and people maybe feel a little bit more shame being openly racist, but you know, it's insidious, and you know, it's here. I'm curious, let me just ask one more. I know I said we were going to wrap up, but I just lived in New Hampshire for 20 years. I just moved back here, and I was curious about your experience of being in Boston and in Cambridge versus Buffalo. I had one gay friend that described Boston as a walking hate crime one time. And I wondered if you had found it challenging to live there.
There was an expose done by the Boston Globe, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, that said that Boston was the most racist city in America.
I believe it.
And that it's two cities, white and black. Mm-hmm. And the evidence took 7 days of multiple page stories to fill out the reasoning for that claim. But one was that we have a big waterfront. We're on the Atlantic here. And some of it was pretty much undeveloped. It was like old train yards and parking lots and stuff like that. And the city decided to build a new neighborhood there. And they put in tens of thousands of luxury apartments using $18 billion of public funds. Not one Black person was hired on that whole construction project. Not one bricklayer, not one painter, not one architect, not one landscaper, not nobody. And only 3 mortgages were approved for Black people out of, say, 30,000 condos. No affordable housing was included, which shows how deeply the racism exists in the city government, in the public funding, in the city planning, in everything. And we have had a number of incidents here. But fortunately, I live across the Charles River in Cambridge, which is considered the most liberal zip code in America. I do go over to the black section of Boston. I go to the white section. I don't have too much problem, but I think a lot of that may have to do with light skin privilege. Because people think, you know, as Celia said, they think I'm more acceptable or they think I'm white, you know, so I don't get hassled as much. But in Cambridge, it's called the Republic of Cambridge because everybody, you know, does what they want to over here. And so, and anyway, I don't take too many wooden nickels. So don't start that with me.
Yeah. You know, it was interesting. I mentioned that I'm in California. My son attended Harvard also as an undergraduate. And when he left here, where we live in a neighborhood that contained a lot of different ethnic groups and friends of all nationalities. And my husband and I tried to tell him, you're going to another area and things might be a little different. And he argued with us. He said, Mom, you are so wrong at that. Finally, it happened one day in the middle of the night. It was here because of the time difference. He called in a panic because he had been in Boston and had been chased and by several guys, you know, white guys, and just had to flee and was just in a panic. But he did go on to graduate and had a wonderful experience in Cambridge at Harvard. So sometimes we have to choose where we live just to be certain that we can have safety and comfort and have privileges because we are fortunate enough to have economic means.
And so many don't, but you're right,
so
exactly.
Do not, yeah. It was just so funny, you know, when you mentioned that. I did not know that you lived in Cambridge.
I see a phone number here that looks like my cousin. Tony, are you on the line? If so, can you unmute yourself?
Maybe she doesn't know how. It could be tricky.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone.
I have a question for Gail. Gail, where do you live in California?
I live in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay area, in the East Bay.
Okay.
El Cerrito, California.
Okay, I'm in Southern California, but I used to live in San Francisco. But the comment I want to make, especially after you talked about your son, well, my younger son, you know, I wanted him to go to, you know, an HBCU. So he went to Florida A&M. And he was there, you know, I guess I can honestly say, I said, you know, he needed to stay there. You know, I didn't let him come home after freshman year, and he stayed, you know, for sophomore year. And he wanted to, you know, to come back to California because he said, you know, I love the campus. I love everything about it. He said, but I just don't like the way I'm treated, Mom, when I go out in the city, you know. And the thing about it, our children, he thought that, you know, being in California would be, you know, and staying home would be a lot better than staying there in Florida, which to a degree it was. And it took him a while to understand that you're going to encounter this racism, young man, everywhere.
Wherever you go, wherever you go. And all the lessons that you have to learn to negotiate.
Yes.
Just as Dolores said, your the way you look, the way your hair looks, your speech, your patterns, everything is going to go through that prism of race.
Right.
And you're going to be judged as worthy the more that you can present like the majority.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that it's a dilemma when you're trying to prepare your children. My granddaughter is going through that now. She left California and went out. She also wanted to go to a historically Black college because of some of, you know, perhaps because some of the experiences she had had. And then when she goes out there, because she chose to go to A&T in North Carolina, she's also not quite happy there either. So it's a different, it's a dilemma. You don't know how and what. And I just hope that our future is better than our past has been. It's really a prayer for me that things will move in the right direction for all of us.
I think it's going to take a lot more conversations like this to make it better, and each of us can do that. Tell our stories. That's what we need to do, is to tell our stories.
I agree.
Well, let's get out there and start talking.
Thank you, Dolores. And thank you to
everyone.
It's nice to be with you.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
Great occasion.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Dolores.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.